Beneath the swirling expanse of stars, countless civilizations had risen and fallen, their legacies scattered like dust across the galaxies. Each one, in its final moments, had scrawled desperate warnings into the void etched on stone tablets, engraved in metal, encoded in light. Messages carried by drones, buried under the sands of dead worlds, or hidden in the orbits of distant moons. Despite the diversity of their voices, the warnings all echoed the same chilling refrain: never wake Earth. The story begins with a discovery. A small research vessel, the Astrea, drifted quietly in the shadow of an ancient, desolate world. Its crew of 6 were seasoned explorers, scavengers of knowledge from forgotten corners of the universe. They had no idea they were about to unearth a secret that would change everything they thought they knew. The pilot, a sharp-eyed woman with a knack for spotting anomalies, was the first to notice the faint signal. It pulsed weakly from beneath the planet's surface, an almost imperceptible beacon crying out from the depths of time. The captain hesitated. Uncharted planets often came with their own share of dangers, traps, remnants of wars, or worse, diseases that no one had seen in a millennium. But curiosity had a way of overriding caution. The allure of uncovering something untouched by scavengers or corporate miners was irresistible. The crew suited up, their nerves thrumming with a mix of excitement and unease. As they descended into the planet's dry, cracked surface, their boots kicking up faint clouds of dust, the signal grew stronger, clearer, almost insistent. The underground chamber they found was unlike anything they had seen before. It wasn't the usual ruin of collapsing architecture and overgrowth. It was pristine. The walls gleamed with strange metal engraved with symbols that seemed to shift when viewed from different angles. At the center of the room, a cylindrical device emitted a low hum. It pulsed with light in sync with the signal that had drawn them here. One of the crew, a linguist who had made a career decoding ancient scripts, gasped as they examined the walls. "These aren't warnings in one language," they whispered, voice trembling. "They're written in all of them. Every known civilization. And some we've never even catalogued." A nervous laugh rippled through the group. Surely, this was some sort of trick, a prank left behind by a long-dead species. But when the linguist ran their hand over the etchings, the patterns lit up, translating into a universal language every member of the crew could understand. The words were hauntingly simple: turn back. Do not wake them. "Wake who?" One of the engineers muttered, the bravado in their voice faltering as the air in the room seemed to grow heavier. Before anyone could stop him, the ship's newest recruit, a headstrong scientist with more enthusiasm than experience, approached the device. "If they didn't want us to touch it, why didn't they hide it better?" he said with a smirk, his hand hovering over the controls. The captain shouted for him to stop, but it was too late. His fingers brushed against the surface, and the room erupted with light. The walls quivered as the engravings melted into motion. Images flashed before their eyes, not on screens, but in their minds. They saw planets crumbling, their atmospheres ripped away like torn fabric. Entire fleets reduced to ash, civilizations screaming in their final breaths. A deep, resonant voice filled the chamber, vibrating in their bones. "You were warned," it said. "You would not listen." The device powered down abruptly, leaving the crew in stunned silence. Then the signal changed. It wasn't a distress call anymore. It was a transmission, a message that was no longer confined to the chamber. Somewhere, far away, something stirred. "We need to leave," the captain ordered, her voice sharp and commanding. But as they scrambled back to the surface, the signal followed them, now beaming directly into the Astrea. Instruments went haywire, and the stars outside the viewport seemed to twist unnaturally. The ship's AI, normally calm and measured, began stuttering, its voice filled with static. "This transmission originates Earth." The words hit like a blow. Earth was a myth, a ghost planet that had faded from maps long before recorded history began. No one had ever found proof it even existed. And yet here it was, sending out its first message in eons. The linguists looked pale, their breath shallow. Every warning we've ever decoded. They all mention Earth. They all say the same thing: never wake it. The pilot's hands trembled on the controls. What if we already have? In the vast emptiness of space, the Astrea began to drift. Far below them, in the depths of the ancient planet, the cylindrical device pulsed one final time before falling silent. But across the galaxy, at the edges of long-dead star systems and the ruins of forgotten empires, something new began to stir. Something that had waited. And waited. For a call to wake up. The crew didn't see it yet, but they would. Soon, everyone would. The Astrea hung in the void, its hull reflecting the cold light of distant stars. Inside, the crew worked in silence, the tension thick enough to feel like a weight pressing down on each of them. The device's transmission hadn't stopped. It echoed through the ship, a faint hum that no amount of tinkering with the comms system could silence. It wasn't just a sound, it felt alive, almost like a presence watching them. The captain sat in her chair, staring at the screen that displayed their trajectory. She had ordered the ship to move away from the planet as fast as the engines could handle, but no matter how far they went, the signal didn't fade. It clung to them, persistent, unshakable. Her jaw tightened as she looked at her crew. She could see the cracks forming, the unease in their eyes. They were explorers, but they weren't prepared for this. None of them were. The linguist sat at a console, poring over the recordings of the chamber. Their hands trembled as they zoomed in on the symbols that had covered the walls. "This doesn't make sense," they murmured, half to themselves. The language is there from civilizations that were wiped out millions of years apart. There's no way they could have collaborated. And yet, they all said the same thing. They all left the same warning. "Maybe it's a hoax," the engineer offered weakly. They were hunched over a diagnostic panel, trying and failing to block out the relentless hum of the signal. "Some ancient species messing with us for a laugh." The linguist shot them a look. "A hoax that spans the history of the universe? That's not how this works. These warnings are real." "Enough," the captain interrupted, her voice cutting through the rising tension. "Right now, we focus on getting away from this mess. I don't care what that signal is or where it's coming from. Our priority is survival." But survival was starting to feel like a distant dream. The ship's systems were failing, one by one. The lights flickered, the artificial gravity wavered, and the air recyclers made an ominous grinding noise. The ship's AI, their ever-reliable companion, was glitching worse than ever. Its voice came through the speakers in fragments, distorted and unsettling. "Earth origin point signal. Cannot escape." The pilot slammed a fist against her console in frustration. "We need answers," she said, her voice cracking. "We can't just run blind. What if this signal isn't trying to harm us? What if it's a distress call? What if someone or something needs our help?" The engineer let out a bitter laugh. "Right. Because every distress call comes with a universal death warning. Sure, let's go play hero." The captain held up a hand, silencing them. "This isn't the time for arguments. We'll figure out what this is once we're safe. Until then, focus." The problem was, safety seemed impossible. The signal was growing louder, stronger, as if it were following them. The ship's sensors picked up something unusual, a faint ripple in space-time behind them, like a shadow that wasn't supposed to be there. It moved with them, keeping pace no matter how fast they went. The recruit, the one who had activated the device, sat in the corner of the room, pale and shaking. His earlier arrogance was gone, replaced by a haunted look. "I think I broke something," he whispered, more to himself than anyone else. "Something we weren't supposed to touch." The linguist glanced at him but said nothing. What was there to say? They all knew he wasn't wrong. The device had been dormant for who knew how long, and they had awakened it. Whatever was happening now, they had brought it on themselves. The ripple behind them grew more pronounced, and the ship's proximity alarms blared to life. The crew scrambled to their stations, scanning the sensors for any sign of what was following them. But the data didn't make sense. The ripple wasn't a ship, or a creature, or anything they could identify. It was just there, a distortion in reality itself. And then, for the first time, the signal changed. The hum that had filled the ship for hours transformed into a voice, not the cold, mechanical voice of the ship's AI, but something ancient and impossibly vast. It spoke in a language none of them recognized, yet they all understood it. "You were warned," the voice said again, each word resonating deep in their bones. "But you did not listen." The crew froze, their blood running cold. The recruit bolted to his feet, his voice rising in panic. "It's talking to us." "How is it talking to us?" The linguist's face was pale, their hands gripping the edge of their console. "It's not a language. It's something else. It's in our minds." The captain's voice cut through the rising panic. "Stay calm. Whatever this is, we'll deal with it. But we do not lose control." The voice continued, unrelenting. "The sleepers must not be disturbed. Their dreams hold the balance. To wake them is to invite the end." The captain stared at the console, her heart pounding. "Who are the sleepers?" she demanded, her voice firm despite the fear clawing at her. "What are you talking about?" But the voice didn't answer. Instead, the ripple behind them surged forward, engulfing the ship in a wave of darkness. The lights flickered and died, plunging the crew into pitch-black silence. And then, one by one, the systems came back online. But something was wrong. The stars outside the viewport were gone. The ship was surrounded by an endless expanse of swirling black, shot through with faint traces of red, like veins running through some vast, unseen creature. The linguist's voice was barely a whisper. Where are we?" The captain's hands tightened on the arms of her chair. "I don't know. But we're not where we were." The pilot's voice was shaky. "The engines are offline. We're not moving." The engineer checked the readouts, their face pale. "It's not just the engines. Every system is locked. It's like the ship isn't ours anymore." And then, out of the swirling blackness, shapes began to emerge. Vast, towering forms that defied comprehension, their edges shifting and flickering like they were caught between dimensions. They moved with an unsettling grace, their presence filling the crew with a deep, primal dread. The voice returned, louder this time, echoing in their minds. "You have awakened the Watchers. You were warned. Now, it is too late." The crew could only stare as the shapes moved closer, their forms blotting out the faint light of the red veins. And then, without warning, one of the forms reached out, a tendril of darkness extending toward the ship. The captain shouted for evasive action, but the ship didn't respond. They were powerless, trapped in the grip of something far beyond their understanding. The tendril touched the hull, and the ship shuddered violently. The lights flickered again, and the voice spoke one final time. "You will understand. Soon." The tendril pierced the hull, and everything went dark. The darkness was absolute. For a moment, it felt like the entire universe had vanished, leaving only the crew suspended in nothingness. No light, no sound, just the overwhelming sense of something vast and unknowable pressing in on all sides. Then, suddenly, the ship's systems roared back to life. Lights flickered, consoles lit up, and oxygen flooded the room with a soft hiss. The crew gasped for air, their senses reeling from the abrupt shift. But the relief was short-lived. The view screen showed something that froze them where they stood. The black void was gone, replaced by a scene that shouldn't have been possible. They were no longer in deep space. Instead, the Astrea hovered over a massive, shattered landscape, jagged mountain peaks rising like broken teeth from an ash-gray surface, stretching endlessly into a sky of swirling storms. The red veins they had glimpsed in the void streaked across the land below, glowing faintly, as if the planet itself was bleeding. But this wasn't just any planet. The shape of the continents, the unmistakable outlines of long dry oceans, it was Earth. Or at least, what Earth had become. The captain leaned forward, her knuckles white as she gripped her chair. How? How is this possible? Earth is supposed to be gone. It's been gone for millennia. It's not gone, the linguist said, their voice trembling. It's broken. It's still here, but it's dead, the recruit finished, his voice barely above a whisper. It's like the planet itself is dead. The pilot stared at the controls, her hands shaking. This doesn't make any sense. We were light years away. How did we get here? The engineer spoke up, their voice tight with barely controlled panic. That thing, whatever it was, it brought us here. It took control of the ship. The recruit sank into a chair, burying his face in his hands. This is my fault. I touched the device. I woke them up. The captain turned to him, her eyes sharp. Pull yourself together. Blaming yourself won't help us now. What we need is to figure out what's happening. Before anyone could respond, the ship shuddered violently, throwing them off their feet. The lights dimmed, and a low, guttural sound reverberated through the hull. It wasn't the hum of the signal, it was something else. Something alive. The linguists scrambled to their console, scanning the readings. Their face went pale. It's coming from the surface. There's something moving down there. On the screen, the red veins in the landscape began to pulse, glowing brighter with each beat, like the planet had a heartbeat of its own. And then the ground split open. Massive fissures tore through the landscape, and from the depths emerged structures towering, jagged spires that looked like they had been carved from the bones of the planet itself. They rose slowly, groaning under their own weight, until they stood like sentinels, stretching high into the stormy sky. The captain's voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed her fear. What are those? The linguist shook their head. I don't know. They're not natural. They're some kind of construct. The pilot pointed at the screen, her voice rising. Look! There's something coming out of them. From the tops of the spires, streams of light began to pour out, forming intricate patterns in the sky. The lights twisted and wove together, creating shapes that seemed almost familiar, shapes that resembled the symbols they had seen in the chamber on the desolate planet. The patterns pulsed in time with the red veins below, like some ancient machine had been switched on. The recruit stood, his voice shaking. It's a message. It's got to be a message. The engineer barked a laugh, sharp and humorless. A message? Sure. Because messages usually come with world-ending light shows. The linguist's hands flew across their console, their eyes wide. No, it is a message. The symbols, they're similar to what we saw before. But this time, they're not warnings. They're instructions. The captain's gaze snapped to the linguist. Instructions for what? I don't know, they admitted. But I think they want us to go down there. The room fell silent. The idea hung in the air like a loaded weapon. Going to the surface of a dead planet, a planet that had been the source of warnings for eons, felt like stepping willingly into the jaws of a trap. But as the spires continued to pulse and the lights danced in the stormy sky, it became clear they didn't have a choice. Whatever had brought them here wasn't going to let them leave. The captain made the call. Suit up. If they want us to go down there, we'll go. But we do this carefully. No one touches anything unless I say so. The crew moved with the kind of grim determination that came when there were no other options. They donned their suits in silence, the tension thick and suffocating. As they boarded the landing craft, the recruit hesitated at the hatch, his face pale. I don't think we should do this, he said, his voice trembling. What if we're walking into something we can't come back from? The captain placed a hand on his shoulder, her expression hard but not unkind. We're already in it. Whatever this is, running won't save us. Let's go. The descent to the surface was rough. The storm winds buffeted the craft, and the red glow of the vanes below painted everything in an eerie light. When they finally landed, the ground beneath their feet felt strange solid, but with a faint vibration, as if the planet itself was alive. The spires loomed around them, their sheer size overwhelming. The patterns of light shifted and twisted, pulling their gazes upward. But it wasn't the spires that held their attention. It was the figures standing at their bases. Humanoid shapes, impossibly tall and thin, their forms shimmering like they were made of liquid light. They didn't move, but the crew could feel their presence, a silent, suffocating pressure that made their skin crawl. The linguist's voice came through the comms, shaky but focused. "They're not attacking. They're waiting." "Waiting for what?" the pilot asked. No one had an answer. The figures stood motionless, their faceless heads tilted as if observing the newcomers. And then, one of them raised a hand. A beam of light shot from its palm, hitting the ground a few meters away from the crew. The earth trembled, and another structure began to rise, a smaller spire, but this one was different. It was smoother, its surface reflective like a mirror. The linguists stepped forward, their curiosity overriding their fear. "It's inviting us." The captain's voice was sharp. "Stay back. We don't know what it wants." But the linguist couldn't stop. They reached out, their hand hovering over the surface of the spire. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the mirror rippled, and an image appeared. It wasn't of the crew or the planet. It was the chamber they had found on the desolate world, the device at its center glowing faintly. And then the image changed. It showed something new, something far worse. A vast, sprawling structure buried beneath the surface of Earth, its edges stretching beyond the horizon. The crew's breath caught as they realized what they were looking at. It was a prison. A prison so massive it had been built into the planet itself. The linguists stumbled back, their voice shaking. "It's not just Earth. The whole planet, it's a containment system." "For what?" the recruit whispered. The answer came not from the linguist, but from the towering figures. Their voices echoed in unison, filling the air with a sound that was both beautiful and horrifying. "For the dreamers." Before anyone could respond, the ground beneath them began to quake violently. The spires pulsed brighter, their lights growing chaotic, erratic. The figures stepped back, their forms flickering. And then the mirror spire shattered, sending shards of light spiraling into the stormy sky. The captain shouted over the comms, her voice barely audible over the rising wind. "Back to the ship! Now!" As they ran, the fissures in the ground widened, glowing brighter with each step. The red veins began to pulse faster, their light almost blinding. And from deep below the surface came a sound, a low, guttural roar that shook the air. Something was waking up. The roar from beneath the surface was unlike anything the crew had ever heard. It wasn't just sound, it was a vibration that seemed to rattle their very bones, an ancient and furious noise that carried the weight of something primal and immense. The ground beneath their feet heaved as if trying to throw them off, and the red veins in the earth pulsed with an intensity that made the landscape look like it was alive and bleeding. They stumbled toward the landing craft, the towering spires looming over them, their lights now flashing erratically like warnings. The humanoid figures, so still and ominous moments before, had vanished, leaving the crew alone with whatever was clawing its way up from the depths of the broken planet. The recruit tripped and fell, his suit scraping against the jagged ground. The captain hauled him to his feet, shouting over the chaos. "Move! We're not sticking around to find out what that is." But even as she said it, her eyes betrayed the same fear the rest of them felt. They weren't going to outrun this. Whatever it was already here. The engineer shouted from ahead, gesturing frantically toward the craft. "Engines are online. We need to lift off now." The pilot sprinted past them, throwing herself into the controls as the rest of the crew scrambled aboard. The roar was deafening now, and as they strapped in, the view screen showed the Earth splitting apart behind them. Something massive and unthinkable was rising from the fissures, its form hidden beneath a shroud of ash and red light. The linguists stared at the screen, their face pale. It's not just waking up. It's reaching out. The captain snapped her head toward them. What do you mean? The signals, the patterns it's been trying to communicate this whole time. But we didn't understand. We weren't supposed to be here. We weren't supposed to hear it. Before the captain could respond, the ship lurched violently. The red light from the planet shot upward, surrounding them like tendrils. The ship's systems flickered and groaned under the strain, and the pilot struggled with the controls. We're caught in something. I can't break free. The linguist's voice cracked as they pointed at the screen. It's not letting us leave. On the surface, the shape was becoming clearer. It wasn't a single entity but something vast and interconnected, a web of limbs, tendrils, and jagged forms, all radiating a terrible, otherworldly power. The crew could feel it in their minds now, a presence pushing against their thoughts, probing, searching. The captain grabbed the linguist by the arm. What does it want? The linguist's voice was barely audible. It's not just waking up. It's looking for something. Or someone. The recruit's eyes widened in terror. It's me. I touched the device. I woke it up. The captain shook her head. No. It's more than that. This was a prison. Whatever's down there was locked away for a reason. And we just broke the seal. The recruit buried his face in his hands, his voice trembling. Then it's all over. We can't stop it. The captain's jaw tightened. Not yet. If this thing was contained once, it can be contained again. But we need to know how. The linguist's hands flew across their console, scanning the symbols that still flashed across the view screen. Their eyes darted frantically as they pieced together fragments of the ancient language. There's a failsafe. The spires, they're part of the mechanism. If we can activate them, we might be able to trap it again. The engineer stared at them in disbelief. Might? You want us to bet our lives on might? The linguist shot back, their voice sharp. Do you have a better idea? Because if we don't do this, nothing's going to survive. Not us. Not anyone. The captain nodded, her voice firm. We do it. Pilot, get us close to the nearest spire. Engineer, be ready to rig anything we need. As the craft veered toward one of the towering spires, the presence in their minds grew stronger. It wasn't just probing anymore, it was speaking, though not in words. Images, feelings, and fragments of thought flooded their minds, overwhelming and chaotic. The recruit clutched his head, crying out. It's inside my head. It knows we're trying to stop it. The linguist grimaced, their own mind reeling from the onslaught. It's not just aware of us. It's afraid. The captain gripped the armrests of her chair. Good. Let it be afraid. The ship landed hard near the base of the spire, and the crew scrambled out, the ground trembling beneath their feet. The engineer immediately began working, their hands flying over the strange symbols etched into the spire's surface. The linguist stood beside them, deciphering the ancient script as fast as they could. The recruit hovered nearby, his fear barely contained. The roar from the fissures grew louder, and the red light intensified, casting long shadows across the cracked ground. The thing rising from the depths was close now, its form partially visible, a mass of shifting, writhing shapes that seemed to defy logic and reality. The air around it shimmered with heat and energy, and the crew could feel its rage, its hunger. The linguist shouted over the noise, their voice hoarse. I've got it. There's a sequence we need to align the spires. The captain nodded. Do it. The engineer worked furiously, activating the mechanisms built into the spire. As the ancient machine roared to life, beams of light shot out, connecting it to the other spires across the landscape. The ground shook violently, and the thing below let out a sound that was almost a scream, an unearthly, piercing noise that made the crew's ears ring. The linguist stared at the symbols, their face pale. It's not enough. The sequence, it's incomplete. We need more power. The captain turned to the recruit, her expression grim. You said it's connected to you. If that's true, you might be the key. The recruit's eyes widened in terror. No. No way. I can't. You can, the captain said, her voice firm. You're the only one who can. Tears streamed down the recruit's face as he stepped forward, placing his hands on the spire. The red light around them pulsed brighter, and the presence in their minds grew stronger. The linguist shouted instructions, guiding him through the sequence. The ground split open further, and the thing below surged upward, its massive form breaking the surface. The crew could see it now, a towering, monstrous shape that seemed to shift and change with every passing second. It let out another roar, its many limbs reaching toward the spire. The recruit screamed as the presence overwhelmed him, but he didn't let go. The spire blazed with light, and the beams connecting the structures pulsed in unison. The landscape shook violently as the ancient mechanism activated fully, its power surging toward the monstrous entity. The creature let out a final, deafening roar as the light engulfed it, pulling it back toward the fissures. The ground trembled as the spires pulsed one last time, sealing the creature beneath the surface once more. The red veins dimmed, and the landscape fell silent. The crew collapsed, their breaths ragged, their bodies trembling from the ordeal. The recruit lay motionless, his face pale but peaceful. The captain looked around, her expression grim. We did it. It's contained. But as the linguist stared at the spires, their face darkened. For now. The recruit's eyes fluttered open, and he whispered something that sent a chill through the crew. It's not alone. The silence that followed was almost as deafening as the chaos that had preceded it. The earth was still trembling faintly beneath them, but the violent roars, the red light, the monstrous form, all of it had faded back into the fissures, leaving only the cold winds of the dying planet to remind them of where they were. The recruit was still lying on the ground, his eyes half open, his face pale and exhausted. The captain knelt beside him, checking his pulse. He stirred weakly and managed a faint smile. I thought I wasn't going to make it, he said, his voice a rasp. You almost didn't, the captain replied, her tone soft but firm. You saved us. You saved everything. The linguist, who was staring at the spires still pulsing faintly with light, shook their head. It's not over. Not completely. He said it wasn't alone. The captain looked up sharply. What does that mean? Was there more than one of those things? The recruit sat up slowly, wincing from the effort. His eyes had a distant, haunted look. It showed me things, he said. When I touched the spire, it wasn't just trying to stop me, it was trying to warn me. There are others like it. They're trapped, like this one was, scattered across the galaxy. The crew exchanged uneasy glances. The pilot, who had been silent up until now, broke the quiet. And what happens if someone wakes them up too? If other civilizations make the same mistake we did? The linguist turned toward them, their face grim. That's why these warnings were left behind. Why the messages were hidden in every ruined world we found. Those who came before us, they must have known they couldn't destroy these things. They could only contain them. And they left these records, hoping that whoever came after them would listen. The captain stood, brushing the dust from her uniform. Well, we listened too late. But maybe it's not too late for others. She gestured toward the spires. This place is a warning, and we're the ones who have to carry it forward now. The engineer, still catching their breath, frowned. How do we even begin to explain this? Who's going to believe us? That there's a network of ancient monsters buried across the galaxy, just waiting for someone to set them free? The captain's gaze was steady. "We'll make them believe. We have the data. We have the recordings. And if that's not enough..." She glanced at the recruit. "We have him." The recruit grimaced, but nodded. "I don't think I can ever forget what it showed me. Even if I wanted to." The crew began the slow process of preparing the landing craft for departure. The spires continued to hum softly in the background, a reminder of the massive forces they had just barely managed to contain. The captain gave one last glance at the alien landscape before climbing aboard. The flight back to orbit was tense and quiet. No one spoke much, each of them lost in their own thoughts. The ship's systems were running on minimal power, battered by the strain of the encounter, and the pilot was focused entirely on keeping them stable. It wasn't until they docked with the main vessel, the dull thud of the ship locking into place, that anyone let out a sigh of relief. As they stepped into the decontamination chamber, the recruit paused, looking back at the planet through the small viewport. Its surface was calm now, deceptively peaceful. But he could still feel the weight of what they had unleashed, and the echoes of that terrible presence lingered in his mind. The captain placed a hand on his shoulder, snapping him out of his thoughts. "Come on. We've got work to do." The debriefing back on the main ship was a grim affair. They laid out everything: the warnings, the recordings, the monstrous entity, the recruit's connection to it. The ship's AI catalogued every piece of data they brought back, compiling a report that was meant to be sent directly to the Central Command of the Galactic Alliance. But as they finished uploading the final files, an alert flashed on their console. "Transmission blocked," the AI reported in its calm, emotionless voice. The captain frowned, stepping closer. "What do you mean, blocked?" "By who?" "Unknown source," the AI replied. "Interference detected from within the galactic network. This report cannot be sent at this time." The crew stared at the screen in stunned silence. The linguist was the first to speak. What if someone doesn't want this to get out?" The pilot leaned forward, scowling. "Who wouldn't want to know about something like this? This isn't a secret you keep, this is a threat to everyone." The captain's expression darkened. "Unless someone already knows. And they've decided it's better if no one else does." The room fell silent again as the implications sank in. If the interference was deliberate, it meant that someone somewhere was actively working to suppress the truth about these entities. And that raised an even more chilling question: why? The engineer finally broke the silence, their voice tight with frustration. "So what do we do? If we can't send the report, how do we warn anyone?" The captain's jaw tightened. "We do it the old-fashioned way. We take it ourselves. If the network's compromised, we don't trust it. We go straight to the Alliance and make them listen." The linguist hesitated. "And if they're the ones blocking it? What if the interference is coming from inside the Alliance itself?" The captain's eyes were hard, determined. "Then we find someone who will listen. Someone who cares about more than politics and power plays. We've come this far, we're not backing down now." The crew began preparations for the journey, knowing it would be long and fraught with danger. The recruit, who had been quiet since the debriefing, finally spoke as they packed the last of the data drives. "Do you think it's enough? That they'll believe us?" The captain looked at him, her gaze steady. "They'll have to. Because if they don't, we're all doomed." The ship's engines roared to life, and they set a course for the heart of the Galactic Alliance. But as they left the ruined planet behind, the recruit couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The presence in his mind was gone, but a faint echo remained, a whisper he couldn't quite make out. And then, as they entered the vast darkness of space, the ship's sensors picked up a faint signal, a pulse, rhythmic and steady, coming from far beyond the edges of the known galaxy. The recruit stared at the display, his heart pounding. "Is that another one?" The linguist leaned over the console, their face pale. "It's a beacon. Just like the one here." The captain's voice was calm but firm. Then we've got more work to do. The ship disappeared into the void, carrying its crew and their hard-won knowledge toward an uncertain future. They had survived the first encounter, but they knew this was only the beginning. The galaxy was vast, and the secrets it held were far older and more dangerous than they had ever imagined. And somewhere, in the cold, endless expanse of space, the echoes of ancient, buried voices began to stir once more.